Hello, and welcome back to the Librarian of the Rings. My name is Ben, I'm the librarian, and today we're talking about what the Silmarillion is. So a really common experience among people reading books is that they get to the end of a book or a series that they really love, and The Lord of the Rings may be perhaps the greatest series ever written, and they get to the end of it and they want to look up what else the author has written because they really want to read more of that. And it's even better if they can read something that happens in the same world or universe as what they were just reading. And as librarians, we help people with this all the time, helping them to find works by the same author and even within the same series or universe. So this happens a lot when people finish reading The Lord of the Rings. They look up Tolkien to see if he wrote anything else. And assuming they've already read The Hobbit, then the first thing that they are likely to find is the Silmarillion. And they get excited and they say, oh, there's something else that Tolkien wrote. I'm going to go ahead and get it and read it. So they pick it up and they start reading it, and they very quickly discover that it is nothing like The Lord of the Rings. And at that point, a lot of people put it down and they walk away from it and they say, this is not the story that I'm looking for. Now, that's perfectly fine. If you start reading the book and it's not the story that you're looking for and you just can't handle it, it's perfectly fine to set it down and walk away from it. I did that actually many times before I made it all the way through. But there are some things that we can understand about the Silmarillion that can help us as we start going through it. And that is to understand what it really is and what it's trying to do.
Who are you?
What frustrates people about it is there's almost none of the same characters from The Lord of the Rings in the Silmarillion, and it seems to be taking place in really a different world entirely. The world is very different, even though it is technically Middle-earth. For a lot of it, it's very different than the world that we got used to in The Lord of the Rings. And the tone of this book is not the same at all, and the historical level that it's looking at the stories through is not at all the same as The Lord of the Rings. So let's learn a little bit more about what the Silmarillion is, and that might help you as you start to read it. Incidentally, if you're confused about the way the Silmarillion is structured, I recently did a video all about that, so make sure you check that out as well. Alright, so what is the Silmarillion? Well, the Silmarillion is basically work that Tolkien left unfinished that he really wanted to publish but couldn't publish during his lifetime because he couldn't get a publisher who would do it. And so Christopher Tolkien, his son, was able to eventually put them together into a volume and get it published. And we will forever be grateful to him for doing that for us. So what then is actually in this book? Well, at its basic level, the Silmarillion is exactly what it says it is. The word Silmarillion in Elvish basically means a history of the Silmarils. The Silmarils are the three great jewels, the greatest jewels that were ever created. And this book is a history of them and what happened to them. That's kind of the simple explanation. It talks about what happened leading up to them being made, how they were made, and then the many wars and adventures that followed their being made until they were eventually lost. At a more complex level, the Silmarillion is really Tolkien's legendarium. Think of it as essentially the mythology and legends of Middle-earth. All the stuff preceding The Lord of the Rings. There's hints of this in The Lord of the Rings, particularly if you think about like Aragorn singing the Song of Beren and Luthien to the hobbits on Weathertop. That is a reference back to the Silmarillion. Also on Weathertop, Frodo evokes the name of Elbereth, who is one of the Valar who play a really important part in this story. There are a lot of callbacks from The Lord of the Rings to the Silmarillion, so there are many stories contained in this volume, and they're all kind of put together in a semi-chronological order, but they're only loosely connected at times. When Christopher put this together, he didn't only include stories that were directly linked to the Silmarils. Some of them are more tangentially linked to the Silmarils, and so at times it'll kind of veer off from the main story and you'll have a whole chapter that kind of deals with something else that might eventually tie back into the story of the Silmarils. So that can be a little confusing at times. Remember also that this is spanning thousands and thousands of years of time, and so it's not the same characters throughout. You don't have just like one protagonist following it through. It's not a novel in any way. Really, it's a collection of legends. And the legends reach all the way back to the creation of the world or even the universe, all the way forward to The Lord of the Rings. So as you're reading the Silmarillion, expect there to be lots of different stories, many different locations, and tons of different characters. Also, keep in mind that it's much more like a history than it is a story. So like I said before, it's not like a novel. It's much more like a history that contains different stories within it. Some of them short and some of them longer, but none of them like a full-length novel. And specifically, the Silmarillion is a history from the Elvish perspective. And so whereas The Lord of the Rings is written kind of at this Hobbit level, where we always have a hobbit who's kind of giving us the perspective on it, beginning at the Shire and ending in the Shire. With this is an elvish history, so the scope is much higher. It's much broader, and we're dealing with basically the histories that immortals would tell. So it's going to be a very different register, and it's going to be more difficult to read than The Lord of the Rings. So just going into the Silmarillion, understanding that it's not a novel will be really helpful for you, because you won't be expecting what you got from The Lord of the Rings, but you will get a lot more information about the world that you first experienced through The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. But it won't always be clearly related to The Lord of the Rings. Remember, I said there's very few characters from The Lord of the Rings that actually appear in the Silmarillion, and even those that do don't appear until a good ways into it. So for example, Galadriel and Elrond are two of the characters that are probably best known from The Lord of the Rings that actually appear in the Silmarillion, but Galadriel doesn't even get a mention until page 61, and she's the first one who kind of comes in, and that's not even really a story about her. And then Elrond himself isn't going to get any mention until page 119 in my edition, and that's just basically as a name in like a historical sequence. And the actual story that he's involved in, although he's only a baby in that story, isn't actually even going to start until page 295. So even those characters that you might recognize, you're not going to see until you are a good ways into the book. And even then, neither Galadriel nor Elrond nor any other character from The Lord of the Rings plays what I would consider a major role in this story. Now, everything I've said here is not to dissuade you from reading the Silmarillion. It is a wonderful book, and I love it, and I think you should read it. I just want you to go into it being prepared for what it is and understanding what it is not as well, so that you can enjoy it. And like I said before, if you pick it up, you start reading it, and you don't enjoy it, and you just can't seem to get into it, it's okay to set it aside and wait a while until you come back to it. That's what I did, and now I really love this book, and it helps me to understand The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit better, but it did take me a good long while before I got to that point. Okay, now I would love to hear from you. If you have started the Silmarillion, let me know. Let me know what point you stopped at. If you've made it all the way to the end, I want to know that too. And if you have a favorite story from it, please let me know that in the comments below. Until next time, I'm the Librarian of the Rings. Farewell wherever ye fare. May your ears receive you at your journey's end.